Hi, everyone. Welcome and good evening. My name is Lauren Artilles, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, the Harvard University Division of Science, and the Harvard Library, I'm thrilled to introduce this virtual event with Mary Roach, presenting her latest book, Fuzz, When Nature Breaks the Law, in conversation with Lindsey Fitzharris. I hope you're all well and safe and hanging in there. Thank you so much for joining us virtually. Tonight's event is the latest installment in our Harvard Science Book Talk series, which works to bring the authors of recently published science literature to our Cambridge community and beyond. Coming up in the series on Tuesday, October 12th at 5 p.m., we'll host David Wallace, Mellon Chair in Philosophy of Science at the University of Pittsburgh, for his new book, Philosophy of Physics, A Very Short Introduction, joined by Harvard's own Jacob Barandes. To learn more about this and our other upcoming virtual events, you can visit harvard.com and sign up for our email newsletter or check out the page harvard.com/science for more info. I'll also share a link in the chat to our Science Research Public Lecture Series page where you can view previous talks that you might have missed. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. So if you have a question for our authors at any time during the talk tonight, click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and we'll get through as many as time allows. In the chat, I'll be posting links to purchase Fuzz and the new paperback re-release of Mary's best-selling Stiff, The Curious Science of Cadavers on harvard.com, as well as a link to donate in support of this series and our store. Your purchases and financial contributions make events like tonight's possible and help ensure the future of a landmark independent bookstore. So thank you so much to our partners at Harvard University and to you all for showing up and tuning in support of authors, publishers, indie bookselling, and especially for science. Finally, as you may have previously experienced in virtual gatherings, technical issues may arise. So if they do, we'll do our best to resolve them as quickly as possible. Thank you for your patience and understanding. And now it's my pleasure to turn things over to our Harvard Science faculty colleague and theoretical physicist, Greg Keston, who will introduce this evening's authors. The digital podium is all yours, Greg.
Great. Well, thank you, Lauren. I am honored to introduce tonight's speakers. So Mary Roach is the author of 5 best-selling works of nonfiction, including Grunt, Stiff, and most recently, Fuzz. And her writing has appeared in National Geographic, the New York Times Magazine, and other publications, and she's in Oakland, California. Joining her in conversation is Lindsey Fitzharris, who's the author of The Butchering Art, Joseph Lister's Quest to Transform the Grisly World of Victorian Medicine, which won the Penn E.O. Wilson Award for Literary Science Writing, and her TV series, The Curious Life and Death of, appeared recently on the Smithsonian Channel. And I have to say, it is dark and very intriguing. She contributes regularly to the Wall Street Journal, Scientific American, and other publications, and holds a PhD in the history of science and medicine from the University of Oxford. And she is over in Britain. And tonight they'll be discussing Fuzz, Mary's latest work. It's Fuzz, When Nature Breaks the Law. So for example, what do you do when you have a jaywalking moose, or if a bear is caught breaking and entering and eating, or you have a murderous tree? And as you would learn in the book, 300 years ago, when animals broke the law, they'd be assigned legal representation and they'd be put on trial. But in Fuzz, Mary also explores the curious science of human-wildlife conflict. And as she does it, as Publishers Weekly says, her writing is wry, full of heart, and loaded with intriguing facts. Or as the best-selling author Eric Larson put it, she gleefully mines for a multitude of bizarre facts that'll make you snort coffee through your nose. So put down your cups and get ready to enjoy. We are very happy to be hosting them here tonight. Lindsey, Mary, take it away.
All right. I hope everybody can hear me.
Okay.
It's always weird, Mary. We talked about how we come on and we know there's people out there, but it's like this kind of bizarre vibe. But before we get started, I just want everybody to know, if you see me looking to the right, I'm monitoring questions. So feed them through as they come in, and I will feed them to Mary at the end of the conversation. So Mary Roach, I just want to say, I'm going to geek out for just a minute. I know it's embarrassing to other writers, but I have read everything you've written. I've loved everything you've written, and Fuzz is no exception to that rule. I've absolutely adored this book about something I didn't even know I needed to know. And because I'm such a nerd, I do all this ridiculous research, unnecessary research before going into a conversation. And I came across this article in the Seattle Times ahead of your event with Deborah Bloom. And it talked about how fraudulent tiger penises were related to how this book got started. And I just want to read to the audience. It said, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Deborah Bloom will be moderating Sunday's discussion, so it's unlikely tiger penises will come up, but Roach is prepared if they do. Mary, your moment has come because I am not afraid to take it in this direction. Tell us about the fraudulent tiger penises and how Fuzz came about as a book.
Oh, absolutely. But before I say any of that, I'm just so excited to be here virtually with you, Lindsay. I'm a huge fan. The Butchering Art is an amazing, amazing book. And so let's get that out of the way. So moving on to tiger penises. Yeah, well, this because people always want to know, what inspired you to write this book? And I don't have the tidy origin story. I wasn't attacked by wolverines as a child, or I don't have that moment where I was like, one day I will write about this. So I got into this topic kind of sideways because I'd been up at the National Wildlife Forensics Laboratory up in Ashland, Oregon, where there's this woman, Bonnie Yates. I believe she's retired now, but she wrote this paper that I stumbled onto called, I think the title was actually How to Distinguish Real versus Counterfeit Tiger Penis. And that intrigued me. Also, the fact that she has put together the world's largest hair library, like hairs of different animals.
Oh, wow.
For trying to identify, when contraband, endangered species materials pass across the border, you have to determine what animal are they from, and was this illegal? So she's got this massive hair library with guard hairs and under hairs and whiskers, and that just spoke to me. I love that kind of. You just say the words hair library and I'm at your doorstep. So, but the tiger penis was, and thank you for asking about it, because I couldn't shoehorn it into the book. I really tried, but it was.
We need to know this.
Yeah. So the penis of the tiger is used in traditional Asian medicine as a virility booster. So the idea being the tiger is this very powerful, respected and revered animal, and that by consuming the penis, you would sort of absorb some of this potency, if you will. It's kind of I'm imagining kind of an erectile dysfunction treatment. But anyway, the penises, almost all of them that are confiscated, are not tiger. They are in fact horse or cow or deer, partly because those are easier to come by, but also they're much bigger. The tiger has really sorry, tigers. It's very small. The dried tiger penis is about the size of a tiger claw, which is not very inspiring if you're, I don't know, yeah, exactly. It doesn't really inspire the effect that you would want. So there is, and I was like, oh my God, there's got to be a sweatshop somewhere in Asia. And I envisioned going in on a sting operation with some agent who's like going to burst through the door like a SWAT team kind of interest. And these people who are hunched over, like carving, because you have to carve barbs into the horse or deer penis so that it looks like a felid, a cat penis, which has barbs. So I'm picturing these people, kind of working over their little penises and then fleeing when we come in. But sadly, I wasn't able to do that because you can't, and it's a legal thing. If it's an open case, I can't come along. I can't be involved in any of the process. So that kind of wrecked it for me.
So
but I did have
about tiger penises, and it doesn't even make it into the book.
No, I know. And the amazing thing is Bonnie told me that she was in San Francisco, I think in Chinatown, where you can still buy different medicinal animal parts. And she said, she had this conversation where they're like, she's like, these aren't tiger penises, right? And they're like, yeah, we know. We call it lesser tiger penis.
Oh my God. I also have a question. Did Deborah Bloom bring up the tiger penises? Because Seattle Times were like, she's not bringing it up.
I can't remember if Deb's pretty game, but I don't think so. I think we talked more about writing. I think we might not have got around to the tiger. So it was up to you, Lindsay.
Yeah, it was really, that was definitely the question I was going to grab. So from tiger penises to what? So Fuzz becomes.
Okay, so yeah, you know, I left kind of sadly. I left the forensics lab, and I thought at some point I thought, well, what if you turned it inside out? What if the wildlife were the perpetrators and the people were the victims? And this part of that turnaround came because I stumbled onto this book, 1906 book called The Criminal Prosecution and Capital Punishment of Animals, which is a bizarre book. And it's not, it's a book that does, people know about this book, but I don't think very many people have actually slogged through the 400 pages. It's very dense, and it's
You're like the only person in the world who's read this book about caterpillar sued. And
I think I may be one of the few people who've slogged through the book, but if you're willing to push on through the denseness of this book, it's just amazing that like there was a situation where I didn't put the weevils. There was a court case involving they said a greenish species of weevil that was prosecuted. I myself wrote about the caterpillar case. I love that.
Which I love.
It was a bunch of caterpillars in a field, you know, eating the crops, which caterpillars do. You know, they're caterpillars, and that's a fruit fly. I'm not gonna coexist. I'm gonna slap that. So the caterpillars that were eating the crops, and the town fathers, we'll call them, I'm not sure magistrates or who they were, but they put up these summonses. They nailed them to trees near the plot of farmland, telling the caterpillars, instructing them to appear in court on a set date, at which point they would be assigned legal representation. And of course, they didn't show up in court, but there was a legal proceeding. That would have been awesome if they all kind of did that little caterpillar thing and came in. But there was a meeting of the magistrates or whoever, what exactly their titles were, I forget. And they decided, well, we will set aside an alternate plot of land for the caterpillars' enjoyment, and then they will stay away from our lettuces or whatever they were, and then everyone will be happy. And of course, by the time this was all worked out, the caterpillars had pupated. They were long gone. So everybody's probably walked away satisfied. And the other thing, and the other thing is that it made the town fathers, or who was ever in the municipality, leading the municipality, it made them appear to be wise and
they got
generous. And
it was all resolved in the end.
Yeah, exactly. And it seemed fair. And it was kind of like the wisdom of Solomon, but only without cutting anybody in half.
Only with little caterpillars.
Only with little caterpillars. So that kind of cemented my idea to kind of look at it as, you know, crime and punishment. And so the book is broken down by crime, and I'm using crime with quotes because obviously animals don't commit crimes. They follow their instincts. The laws are not written for them, but nonetheless, they do break all of our laws. We start with murder, manslaughter, home invasion, aggravated assault, and then we move to the misdemeanors, jaywalking, vandalism, trespassing,
you increased my paranoia a lot in this book, actually, especially, and see, I had all these questions, my second question was on the caterpillars. And I wanted to also say that because as a historian, I gravitate towards all those brilliant asides that you sort of weave in. And I fed out to people on social media the question, what does the 1918 flu pandemic have to do with man-eating leopards? And I feel like I need you to answer that question because people who have come to the event wondering how those things are related.
Sure. Yeah. So for this book, I spent some time in the middle Himalaya. And by the way, I love your coffee mug.
Appropriate 2020.
Yes, exactly. Appropriate for this question. Anyway, so for this book, I spent some time in the middle Himalaya in India, which is a region in India where leopards stalk and prey on humans from time to time. And that's something that it doesn't happen much in the southern regions further south. It's just in this one area. And the theory the theory of it's this Jim Corbett, who was a hunter who was brought in to kill this leopard called the man-eating leopard of Rudraprayag. So I was actually in Rudraprayag and in that vicinity. And Jim Corbett's theory was that this was happening right around the time of the flu pandemic, and there were so many people dying so quickly that the more traditional rite of bringing the body down to the Ganges and doing a cremation there, there wasn't time for it. They just couldn't keep up. So they did this kind of expedited version where they would put a hot coal in the mouth and then sort of roll the body, from what I can understand, sort of just roll it down the hill toward the Ganges, which is not far. Right. I mean, when you're up there, the Ganges is always, down in the valley there. And so there were a lot of dead humans around, and leopards will scavenge. And he felt that they might have developed a taste for human flesh. And that's, who knows, you'd have to ask the leopards, but more, I don't know. I think there's a lot of exaggeration in terms of ascribing the number.
But
yeah.
I was going to say, we were talking a little bit before we came on, and I didn't want to kind of blow the story that I was going to tell you because you actually didn't know about it. But during the pandemic, the thing about that story that rings sort of true in a way is the ways that these, health crises, the world is so interconnected, even more so now.
Right.
And the thing that it reminded me of was, I think it was in Phuket in Thailand. There's this area where tourists can go to feed the monkeys. And because all the tourism dried up, you had all these hangry
yes.
that were like coming down. There's like videos of these guys coming down and they're like, where are our bananas? Where are the people who feed us? And so you just think, wow, of all the things I predicted for 2020, hangry monkeys, not one of them. So you don't know the way that these kinds of health crises kind of have these impacts on wildlife as well.
No, it's true. I mean, here in California, when the wildfires were there was a very large wildfire near South Lake Tahoe. I think it was that one in particular, although I imagine it happened everywhere. You had bears coming down because they had evacuated the whole South Lake Tahoe region. And you had bears that were coming down, and bears are pretty good at breaking into cabins and houses. And so that they were doing that, and most likely because a lot of their food sources had burned up, and or they'd been displaced from the region that they knew, and they knew where the different food sources were, and so now they were somewhere else, and they're just looking for food anywhere. So
I mean, the amount of things that happen that kind of throw off balance, like one of the things that's struck me in the book was when you talked about how climate change affects bear activity because of hibernation patterns.
Right. There was a study that looked at the relationship between temperature rise and the length of hibernation. And it was pretty amazing. I mean, for like a 2 degrees Fahrenheit jump in temperature, the hibernation would be shorter by a week. And so if you project it out to 2050, you might see I think they were said between 15 and 40 days shorter. And that's 15 to 40 days more where the bears are out on the land trying to find food, coming into contact with people. So
and you said the better they are, that the more cubs they have, like it affects their fertility. And so we have more chances of overpopulation and more chances of interaction with these wildlife animals.
Yeah, that's right.
Crazy.
Yeah. In the Himalayas, though, there's other stuff going on that has to do with economics. People leaving the area to go work, not farming anymore, going to the cities. So there's a lot of abandoned farmland, or there's livestock being tended less, and by fewer people. So you have the leopards are attracted to the livestock themselves are an easy target, but also if you only have one person guarding them, then sometimes, and it's often children. Because children are smaller, they're easier prey. I mean, this is often true with, whether it's mountain lion or alligators or leopards, they're an easy take. So
and you said the infrastructure as well in some of these areas, not having enough school buses or any school buses, so the people are exposed and they're walking, in an exposed area. It's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's economics too. Yeah, there's not a medical center close by anywhere, and there's not school bus service. And it's interesting because people's anger is not so much toward the leopards, and well, I mean, some people it is, but it's often toward the government for not not providing some of these services that would enable people, because there's kids walking home at dusk, which is the time when leopards usually strike there. So you've got kids walking home a couple of kilometers from the school, and that it shouldn't be that way. So anyway,
and that was interesting too, like the cultural differences. Would you say that in America there's more anger directed at the animal itself versus in some of these other countries where, as you say, it's towards the government, it's not necessarily blaming the animal?
Well, yeah, I mean, here it's very, I think it's a real mix. I mean, if you're someone whose livelihood is livestock or agriculture, I think you do get pretty annoyed with the animals that are cutting onto your bottom line. And also, if you're, say, a rancher, there's an emotional component as well. If there's some wolf that comes in and eats a newly born calf, that kind of thing. It's just there's, I think there is a fair amount of anger for those folks. But there's, on the other extreme, there's people who are very, very committed to the welfare of wild animals and don't want to see them harmed, even in cases where they harm humans. So it's, we are a pretty split country.
And sometimes animals get the bad rap, don't they? They get blamed for something that they didn't do. You talk about, and then first chapter about the forensic, that's so fascinating. And about one particular case where they thought it was, I believe, a mountain lion that had attacked this guy, but they found out it was actually a murder. You tell us a little bit more about. Also, by the way, when you described the wounds, I was like, vampire. I didn't think mountain lion. I was just like, well, that's obviously two puncture marks.
Yeah, it did very much. Yeah, that's right. Maybe they were both wrong and it was a vampire.
Yeah, exactly.
We need to reopen this case.
That sounds like one of the most fun. I mean, fun. We're both weird people, so it sounds fun to me. To kind of go through the forensics of the animal forensics. Tell us a little bit more about that process.
Sure. Yeah, I went to this. It's a 1-week training called Wildlife Human Attack Response Training, or WART, which is, by the founder's admission, a terrible acronym. But anyway, WART is it's part in the classroom and part with simulations, and it's basically training people who work for wildlife agencies. These are the people who come in when someone is killed by an animal, and it's interesting the parallels between this forensics and what's done in a human on human crime. I mean, the crime scene is sealed off with the yellow tape. You have professionals who come in and who are gathering evidence, who are looking at blood drip patterns, and who are trying to establish linkage between the victim and the suspect. And but the difference is that when you start out, your first task is to figure out what species. Was it a mountain lion? Was it a bear? Or was it a human? And you mentioned this case, and we learned about this case when it was a guy was found dead on a hiking trail, and he had these puncture wounds to the neck. And while it is true that a mountain lion does deliver this killing bite to the back of the neck, kind of severing the spinal cord often, while that is true, whoever made that determination had not taken the WART training, because you would notice very quickly that there wasn't, you're going to look for upper jaw and lower. If you see puncture marks that seem like they were from the upper canines, there's going to be the lower canines. So there was no, pressure and counter pressure. That wasn't there. That there would be the claw marks are a distinctive kind of triangular, when the animal sort of holds the person while it delivers the bite. So that wasn't there. So somebody was kind of lazy or just not well informed, and they determined it to have been a mountain lion, when in fact it was a guy with an ice pick. And that guy went free. He was eventually arrested for a different crime, and while he was in prison, he bragged about getting away with this ice pick killing. And so eventually he did do his time for that. But it was just really interesting that confusion could happen. But and so that's why it's important for people in
Yeah.
this line of work to take this class. And it was it was kind of surreal because it was held in a casino outside Reno, even though most of the instructors were from British Columbia. They're mostly Canadians because there's a lot of bears up there, and a lot of mountain lions. But so we were in this big like conference room, the Ponderosa room, and right in the next room, there was just a sort of dividing, one of those doors, that collapsible doors, so you could hear what was going on. So there's a giant bingo game going on. Meanwhile, the bingo people are hearing, some of the footage that was being shown in the presentations was, one of them was this lion coming at somebody, and it was just this, and you got to figure that the people in the bingo room are like, what's going on in the Ponderosa room? But it was,
bemused. You're always like, you're bemused by these horrible things.
Well, it was just I love this, just the juxtaposition of a low rent casino with like wildlife crime. And plus the whole Canadian dude element of it was kind of great, because they had, we had workstations. We each had a soft touch mannequin that had been doctored with very realistic renditions of the wounds that happen with a bear attack or cougar or wolf, whatever it was. So, but they had labeled each workstation with a different Canadian beer. Right. So there was like Molson, and then there'd be this like scalped person with their head hanging off, Labatt. Just, it was just
Didn't you say they carried these dummies out like in full view of the casino? Like,
well, they did at one point. It was when we were the session was over, and the guy who organized it was taking some of the naked, eviscerated, scalped, and otherwise bloodied mannequins out of the casino. But meanwhile, the bingo game was breaking up. So I just remember him crossing the hall with this naked, bloody mannequin form under his arm, and one of the bingo players was coming along, and he just goes, "Excuse me," like no explanation of why he's carrying this.
Oh, so my gosh.
This is my kind of day.
I love that juxtaposition between this totally absurd world that you kind of immerse yourself in, and you really immerse yourself in these worlds well, because, and that leads on to another question. We have leopards and bears and danger trees and all these kinds of things. Did you ever feel in danger while you're doing your research?
I did once. I went for a walk up in the leopard area. I walked down this road. Because I was there for a few days, and I just wanted to go for a walk, and I didn't realize how quickly the sun was going to set. So it was getting to be dusk, and I was still on the road and walking along, and there's very little traffic and very few people out, which is the kind of setting that leopards love. So, and I had driven in with the researcher along this winding road, and all along the way, he was pointing out, like, you see that bus shelter? An old man was there. He was taken by a leopard. This field, in the middle of the daylight, an audacious attack. A young woman was taken. Over here, a woman, 32 years old. So it was like this nonstop narration of leopard mayhem. So, which kind of occurred to me as I'm walking back, and the sun has dipped behind the hills.
Yes.
And I'm like, this is.
You thought you might become like part of a Dateline episode, like a bemused Mary Roach, and Keith Morrison is kind of narrating.
Yes.
Terrible
exactly.
that happens.
Exactly. Yeah.
But nothing happened, and you felt generally, because you really do immerse yourself, whether it's, Stiff or all these different books, you immerse yourself completely in your research, which is
at
some level.
No, it's, but I wanted to be, I always want more. I would have wanted to be in more danger, because I have, at the same time, I know rationally that it's what I'm doing is stupid. At the same time, I'm kind of a sucker for that kind of, I know it's going to make it a much more interesting scene.
Yes.
There was a scene, I probably don't want to, it's a little hard to describe, but there was a scene, it was all in stuff that we heard that did sound like somebody
I know what you're talking about.
was possibly being attacked, and that was scary for about 2 minutes, but anyway.
And And then you were like, this is going to be great in the book, you know?
Well, yes,
Right.
yeah, exactly. So that with all of my books, like the more awkward, the more disgusting, the more frightening, the more embarrassing, the better for the book, just because, and it's fun for me to write those scenes, even though it's not always fun to live them.
Yeah. Do you feel like you have to keep kind of upping it every book? You have to kind of do something even crazier. You gotta, someone just said, you alive, Mary. So be careful.
Yeah, I do feel a certain amount of pressure to not necessarily to up it, but you know, to meet the same bar. You know, I don't want to disappoint people. So
I mean, actually,
yeah.
It says here, is it easier or harder to write books like as it goes on?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question because it's both, I think. It's easier in that I know what I'm doing. Whereas when I wrote Stiff, I had, there's no, you know, what to expect when you're writing a book. You know, there's no guide. Your publisher goes, you sign the contract. They're like, okay, see you in 2 years. Good luck. And I'm like, I don't know how to do this. And so and I didn't turn the book in chunks. I just had to just cross my fingers and hope that they weren't going to kill it and that it's what they wanted. Also, my proposals have so little overlap with my actual book.
Yeah.
You know, because I don't know anything when I start.
Yeah.
I really don't. I don't do a very thorough book proposal. And so yeah, there's a lot of fear.
Old friend Eric Larson, he said at the beginning of this process when I sold my book, he said, never sell a book off the back of a napkin, which I then did for the second. Like, you're like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
You feel like there's a story there, but you aren't sure, and then you kind of, you know, commit to it.
Yes, I do that all the time.
You know what you said about with my first book, you know, things would happen and then Eric would be like, oh, that's good, you want that to happen. But now I have this angst with the second book. I'm like, what if that review doesn't come in, or what if? So it's harder. I see what you mean. It's easier and it's harder. You know what to anticipate, but also there's like more expectation, isn't there?
Yeah. I think that the second book is the hardest. If the first book does well, there's a lot of pressure on the second book, but I don't know. I mean, I had this sense of like, oh, the first book did well. This is easy, you know, and then the second book didn't do as well as the first. I'm like, maybe it's not that easy. Yeah, I don't know. I know that I go through the same, as my husband will point out, there's always a point in every book where I collapse on the sofa and I'm like, forget it. Just forget it. Everything's falling apart. I just got turned down by this person. This chapter isn't going to work out. Nothing. Just forget it.
Yeah.
I'm not just, why do I do
I know. Do you ever talk to writers who enjoy I mean, do any of us enjoy it? Like, it's always hell when you're doing it. You're like, why am I doing this? It's terrible, you know?
I know. I mean, I very much enjoy the research trips, and when they go well, I enjoy the writing, but in between all of that, there's just a lot of self-doubt and a lot of wondering and a lot of like, what is this book even about? And who am I to, I don't know. I'm not an expert. I don't know.
That's fun. But I think there's probably going to be aspiring writers out there who are very heartened to hear that the great Mary Roach feels that. It never goes away, does it? It's kind of that.
I don't think so.
You know, that second guessing, and you really put your heart into the research. And actually, you know, I watched that interview you did with Sam Keane, and you said that you only use about 5% of your notes.
Sure.
So my question is, when are you going to put out a book with all the stuff that you discarded from your other books?
Oh God, never, because it's all so dull. You know, it's so dull.
Really?
I'm just writing everything down. And then I go through and I just circle all of the bits that I think that I'll use, and then I transcribe those. So I'm just taking it all down because I don't know what I might need for background, what I might need. I don't know. That I'm just a note-taking machine, but most of it is just not the good stuff. You know?
Are you the kind of person as well that because you're so used to observing the world around you, you go into a restaurant and you're kind of like listening, you're like, oh, that's not an interesting conversation.
Oh yeah, yes, for sure. It's very irritating for people. And I'll be like having a conversation and go, well, look at that. Did you ever notice? You know, I do that.
Yeah.
But I think I was going to say, you know, that I do think that self-doubt and fear and a certain level of insecurity is why I've been successful, because it forces you to stay critical and to not get lazy and to keep, like, I just did a podcast called Bananas, when these guys are comedians, and one of them worked doing punch-ups. They give him a script and he goes through and he makes scenes funnier. Like he adds lines, he adds jokes. And so I think there's a certain amount of, not that I do a punch-up version of my books, but I go back over and I'm like, this passage from here to here is kind of flat. Not that it has to be funny, but I gotta, either the language has to be fresher, or there needs to be something surprising, or maybe a bizarre footnote or something to kind of punch it up, really. And I think that part of that is just this fear. Like, I'm always writing with this, imagining the reader kind of about to put the book down and go, because I do that all the time with books, not your book. But I do this.
It's okay.
It's so good. It's so good.
Oh God, that's so embarrassing. But thank you. When you tweeted that you were reading it, I was like, oh my God, Mary Roach is reading my book. But do you hate your books? Like, can you go back and read them? Like, I mean, because like I can't even read Butchering Art now, because you move on as a writer a bit, and you're like, oh, you see all that's wrong with it. Does that happen to you too? Yeah,
to a certain extent. I thought, I mean, because I did my audiobook for the first time for Fuzz. And I thought having to read it line by line would be sheer torture. Yeah. Because nothing like reading it aloud to go like, that's pretty rambling. Yeah. Hey, we could have lost that paragraph. So, but it wasn't bad. It really wasn't. It was a fun process, and there were only a couple places where I'm like, yeah, I would leave that out. But I've never gone back and reread a book of mine. So every now and then,
like gone back and read stiff.
No, never. I've never. I had to dip back in because we just re-released it, so I updated it. You know, we have an epilogue that brings it kind of up to date, and so I did kind of flip through it. I didn't actually read it, but I flipped through it, and it wasn't as painful as I thought it would be.
I just, it's weird. I think, like, for me, the Butchering Art was like a first attempt, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. You know, who knows what they're doing when they put something out? And so it would be really hard to kind of go back to it. But also along the lines, Aaron Murphy asked, is there a topic that you haven't been able to touch on yet for some reason or another but is of interest, but you've kind of abandoned it maybe as a book?
You mean other than the tiger penises?
Yeah, exactly.
Fraudulent tiger penises. I had kind of a 2-month period where I thought I wanted to write about the natural disasters and kind of the aftermath and a variety of things relating to that, but the logistics were impossible. So I gave up on that. I thought that, sure, I can get my way to Pakistan within 24 hours after no, you can't. You can't. Plus, I'd need to be kind of on call with a
fix of it. Yeah, it could be.
Yeah, like often the airports are closed. You can't. Where would you stay? And there's no, if there are places to stay and things to eat, the people who are saving lives should have those. So it just didn't make sense. Plus, you get put into there's a incident command system, and you're just part of the press, and you're not. It's not like I'd be climbing over the rubble or doing anything particularly roachable. So
roachable.
I gave that up, but not without a fight. I'm very persistent.
You never know, you might go back to it. Also, like a trade question. First of all, I love the feel of this. I don't know what kind of paper they use. That's not a question for you, but like the cover feels really good, guys. It's got a lot of texture, which I love. But obviously you're known for your pithy titles. Was this a title that had occurred to you right at the beginning, or was it like a really long process?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because that Fuzz was on the book proposal, but very shortly thereafter, I decided I wanted to call it Animal Vegetable Criminal. It's a play on animal vegetable mineral.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I almost like wrote the book around that title. That's why there's the chapter, The Terror Beans, because my editor was like, Mary, there's not enough vegetable in this book.
Right.
So after the fact, I added that chapter. And then a couple of months before, it was like February, and the book was just about to go, start to go into the printing process. And Mark Bittman, who is a quite well-known cookbook writer here, New York Times food writer, put out a book about as a history of food called Animal Vegetable Junk. So
yeah.
My publisher didn't want it to appear that I had
Taken that.
copied his idea. We had this idea independently. So they decided to go back to Fuzz, which is, more in keeping with my brand of, which is never, it was never a marketing decision to do one-word titles. It was just, I started out with one, and then I had two, and then once you have two, it becomes it's a thing,
Yeah, it does.
So
yeah. So Fuzz was the original title. You're pretty happy. I mean, I think it's great, and it goes so well with this cover. If everybody, I don't know if people have been able to see.
Yeah, and plus we got to do these little. We actually had the patch.
Oh, so cool! I love that. That was so awesome. Yeah, I love. I'm always obsessed with covers. And
me too.
Book by cover, but everybody does. Do you have like really strong opinions about your covers? Do you get kind of involved in that?
Yeah, I think every author does, right? I mean, it's like a good cover is so exciting.
Important, yeah.
So yeah, it's really important. Like Stiff, the original cover was not the toe tag feet. The original cover of Stiff was this kind of bizarre, it was like a dead guy with a shaved head lying face down, kind of typing, like his hands are, he's like typing the way I guess a dead person would type. Rigor mortis apparently makes it hard to type. So and then the coming out of the typewriter was the word stiff, by Mary Roach, which made it seem like I'm the shaved head, dead, bald guy typing. So it's kind of weird, but I was like, okay, it's my first book. I don't know.
Cover, or they changed the cover?
It went to Galley. It was actually in Galleys. And then somebody from Borders said, we love this book and we're thinking about it for Original Voices, which is a program where they feature new authors. He said, but not with this horrible cover. And so at the last minute, they had the cover redone.
Wow.
Were you
unhappy with the original, or did you not really think about it until someone said,
I don't know. I was kind of, just bracing. I mean, it was kind of quirky. I was okay with it. I actually fought against the cover of Stiff as it ended up, because I thought, it's derivative of 6 Feet Under, which was really big at the time. And I thought, it seems like a knockoff of 6 Feet Under. And it also, the toe tag thing, you don't have toe tags on a research cadaver. It's more like a victim of a crime in a morgue. And it just, so like, happily, they didn't listen to me. Because it's a great cover.
Know, right? It's like I'm going through covers for my next book, and sometimes they send you a version and you're like, what? That's not, I mean, because I don't know about you, but I'm very visual, so I have a strong sense of what it could or should maybe look like, and then it comes. It's delightful though, especially like you see the foreign covers and you're like, oh, that's an interesting interpretation of the subject.
I love the foreign covers. There's a cover of Packing for Mars. The Russian cover is like a softcore porn cover. There's a naked woman. I think there's a scarf kind of tastefully draped across her nipples, and she's waving out this porthole of the spaceship. And then there's an astronaut in the big puffy white suit. She's like waving goodbye, as though it's a book entirely about sex and zero gravity. I love that cover.
Oh gosh, you gotta tweet that cover.
I know I should. I should. Good idea. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you do. You see these covers and you're like, wow, that's such a bizarre. Actually, speaking of Stiff, an anonymous attendee said, could you talk a bit more about the field of cadaver research and how it's changed since the original publication of Stiff? I don't know if you have been keeping up to date with your cadaver research, if you can answer that.
Well, I did, because I just did the epilogue. I did the update, and it's, I was kind of bracing for, it's been almost 20 years. There's going to be a lot that's different, but people still die and they still donate themselves to research. And the research tends to be for things that you can't use a live person for, because they would be injured or harmed. So There are some new wrinkles in that there's going to be a lot of activity as self-driving cars come on the market, because now if you don't have to sit facing forward with your hands on the wheel, how do you if people can sort of sit facing each other, they can nap, they can lie down, like as people are freed up to move around the inside of a vehicle. Now, where do you put the airbags? And where do you put the restraint belts? How do you make that vehicle safe? So there's a lot of work going on there. There's some work being done with drones that delivery drones. If the drone drops from the sky and lands on somebody, how do you make that safe? There's a couple. I talked to this researcher who's been looking into that, making them kind of collapsible, like the front of a car kind of collapses to absorb the energy gradually. So it's not like one wham impact.
And they're using cadavers to understand this.
They're using, they're not dropping them on live people.
But they're crashing it onto cadaver. It's just so bizarre. Oh, I thought you were going to say the things that have changed with cadaver research is they don't let Mary Roach into the labs anymore after Stiff became so popular.
Yeah, no, they in fact, I think it would have been a lot easier if this was my 5th book, because when I wrote Stiff, nobody knew who I was, and so I think they were like, who is she? What is she going to do? Yeah. So I was kind of an unknown.
But there's a real closed door attitude, isn't there? So in a way, it kind of probably played to your advantage. Don't you think they'd be a bit more scared of you coming in now because they know it could be a huge best-selling hit?
Yeah, I guess so. I think that maybe possibly because of Stiff, to some extent, people in this world are a little less squirrely about what they do. I think their concern is that, somebody from television is going to come in and do kind of like a gotcha thing, because almost any time you say something about a cadaver research project, you can make it sound disrespectful and horrible. Like one guy called me up because he wanted me to comment on this. He's like, they've got bodies stacked in a freezer. And I was like, well, how would you store them?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Exactly.
You can hang them by the ears like this. Is that better? Would you? I don't know.
But people get like really queasy, I guess, about
people exactly. It's very easy to get the public worked up about something, and I would just say to these people from the media, because I used to get a lot of calls, I go, you don't have a story here, and if you do this story, you're just going to dissuade a lot of people from donating their remains. So please don't do this story.
Even before we came on live here, Mary and I guys were talking about the facelifts in Stiff, which I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with that book. And that scene really stood out to me. And now I'm writing this book on facial reconstruction during World War I. And, people think of plastic surgery. So there's like a term plastic surgery, and under it, reconstructive surgery. And then part of that is cosmetic. But a huge part of it's still reconstructive surgery. So these surgeons doing these facelifts are still learning important facial anatomy, and they're probably doing reconstructive work on, people who desperately need it. So I love how the book kind of, there is a shock value to some of the ways the bodies are used, but then you unpack it and you think, wow, this is actually, the benefits of this are quite incredible. And that must have been fun for you to learn as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely tried to get across the heroics of people who don't. I mean, these are people who, taking the example of organ donation, here are people who are saving 5 or 6 lives when they're dead. I mean, most people when they're alive don't save anyone's life, and I mean, it's incredibly generous kind of, and they're almost like, cadavers are kind of like superheroes in that they don't feel any pain. You can cut them into pieces and distribute them and to 6 different labs, and they don't care. They're dead, and the person wanted that done. When it gets tricky is the unclaimed bodies, which used to be what was done. I mean, well, obviously there were some of them stolen, but some of them were just, different municipalities and counties would, if there was an unclaimed body, they would donate it to medical research, which, it seems you can kind of go either way on that, because you don't know what the person's religious beliefs were or what they would have wanted. But on the other hand, something good comes out of a death, which was always what seemed to me with most of the things in that book is how great is it that something positive comes out of a death,
Yeah.
So.
And we don't like, we don't like to think of our doctors as practicing, but they have to practice on something. And,
Yes,
the
right.
facial facelifts are a great example of that. Someone asked me about Boardwalk Empire, and there's a character in there that wears a mask. I haven't actually seen that, guys, but one of the things that strikes me in Hollywood especially is that disfigurement is like a trope for evilness. And that's something that I really break down. The new Bond movie, I think there's 2 disfigured villains in it. And so as someone who's dealt with a lot of disfigured soldiers in World War I, that's kind of upsetting to see that, continue.
Yeah, there is a dermatologist I know who did a website, I think it was called Skinema, and he looked at how skin is portrayed in films, and he talked about that, like albinos or people with albinism, and even acne and scars, and just the way facial disfigurement or conditions, genetic conditions,
character, or you think of the opera as well, another example.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
But this isn't about that. Actually, I want to ask a question here. Kate Carpenter's asked, how do you sort out what to keep and what to leave in your books?
Oh, that one is easy because it's just the best shit goes in. That's how it happens.
I mean, that must be a long process.
In terms of what I'm going to focus on for a chapter. There's always a bunch of file folders at the back of the file cabinet that are things I thought that I might cover, but I couldn't get access. I couldn't build a narrative that I thought was fun enough or interesting enough. So it just didn't make the cut. So, and then, that sometimes makes it a little hard to, figure out the order of the chapters. Like
I kind of want to see that cabinet though. You say it's all boring stuff that you cut, and I'm like,
it's not necessarily boring, but I couldn't be in person. I couldn't have like a scene where I spend a couple days somewhere and there's that fruit fly. Damn it.
No coexistence in Mary Roach.
Yes, exactly.
We're getting to the end. I have all these questions that I didn't even get to, but I wanted to. Oh, I've hit some of these here. Someone did ask, and it's kind of something that we've sort of covered, but any advice to people who want to do what you do? And that's like a really generic question. I'm sure you get this, but like, how do you become Mary Roach?
Yeah. Okay. I do have an answer for that one. I have a quote, and I wish to hell I could remember whose quote it is, because I don't remember whose quote it is. But here's the quote. Okay. Traveler, there are no paths. Paths are made by walking. So in other words, don't be me, be you, and be the person that other people want to follow along and be like. So
I love that.
Yeah. I mean, the worst advice that I ever got was some agent who was trying to tell me you should write a book, because I was writing magazine pieces. And he said, and he was like, why don't you do, the physics of Star Trek, that was really big. What if you did, the biology of, I don't know what it was. I don't know. But anyway, why don't you try to be a lesser version of that, which is the terrible advice. So I guess you
got to find that thing. And I think also, what really people gravitate towards your stuff because you're genuinely passionate about it. There's a lot of people who just kind of pick up, subjects and they do it and they're trying to build fame. Fame should never be the goal of anything. It's, that's the exhaust fumes of what.
Yeah. You have to, because you're going to spend at least 2 years of your life in this topic. And if you're not excited by it, it's hard to make the reader excited by it. Like, with your book, just like, by the way, is that Lister's microscope?
Oh, no, I wish. That would be amazing. It's just a 19th century microscope. Got a little picture of Lister there, and there's all kinds of weird shit.
Yeah.
I used to do a YouTube. And guys, by the way, if you didn't notice my crow, we didn't even get to crow bombing.
We didn't get to crow bombing. Well, we'll just leave that as an enticement.
But everybody, I mean, we have to wrap this up in a minute. And I see there's other questions, and there's
there's Jill Tracy. Hi, Jill Tracy.
Oh, Jill, yeah. There's so many, and Brandy was here earlier, and she had to go. So it's so awesome to see all you guys attend these events. And you know what? If Harvard Bookstore sends some of these questions, maybe I could tweet out some of them, and Mary can answer a few. Because we couldn't get to everything here, but you guys are gonna love Fuzz. You're gonna love it because I loved it and I couldn't put it down. And also, if you get the new edition of Stiff, it says 1 million copies sold, which I can't get over. I'm sorry.
That's crazy.
The most brilliant thing ever. So Mary, I could talk to you for hours, and it's just been such a thrill for me to interview one of my favorite authors of all time. So thanks for that opportunity. And Harvard Bookstore, I'll hand it back to you if you want to wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lindsey. This was so fun, and I'm such a fan.
Oh, I'm such a fan. Thank you so much. Hey, Lauren.
Thank you both for this fantastic conversation. I could listen to you go on for another hour. I wish we had more time. Thank you to Greg for your intro. Thank you to all of you out there for joining us tonight. I dropped the links to purchase Fuzz and Stiff in the chat, or you can just check it out on harvard.com. But please, I encourage you to buy both of these fantastic books. And on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, the Harvard Division of Science, and the Harvard Library, all here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, thanks so much, everyone. Have a great night and keep reading. Please be well.
Bye,
thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks.